Hello everybody, how you doing? My name is Jungels. I am the Assistant Director of Performance at IHT Human Performance in Charleston, South Carolina. We just opened up January 6th of 2025 and we expect to open our doors in May of 2025. Shout out to Jared Slater for hiring me as his Assistant Director of Performance. I'm very excited today to talk to you about different aspects of pain and injury and different solutions, and we're going to discuss at sort of the base level of some of these systems. We might get more in depth later, but today we are talking about compensation and pain and injury, okay? So first of all, my question to you is, how do you view compensation, okay? The next thing is, what is the root cause of pain and injury? Now, I would argue that pain and injury is the last thing that the body wants. The body does not want to be in pain. The body does not want to have injuries. Because what happens when the body has pain and the body has injuries is that the body has to find a way to keep moving or to keep going, right? You're going to get hurt. It's just a fact of life. You're going to have pain. It's just a fact of life, right? You're going to get injured. Again, just a fact of life, especially if you're an athlete. It's bound to happen. You can't live in a bubble your entire life. And why would you want to? That's boring, right? So you're going to go out there, you're going to get hurt, you're going to have pain. It's just going to happen, right? But when these things hang around for a long time, the question becomes, what is the root cause? Why is this happening to me, right? Now, let's say you're having an issue with your knee. Somebody might tell you that, oh, if you're having an issue at your knee, the root cause might be in your ankle or your hip. Now, that could definitely be true. But is that true 100% of the time? No, it's not. Are you kidding me? To be so binary like that, or to be so, like matter of fact about the thing, there's just no use in doing that, because the body is way more complicated than that, right? So I argue that pain and injury is caused by compensation. Now, how do you view compensation? Well, I view compensation through two different lenses, okay? And the reason why I view compensation through these two different lenses is because of the two mentors that I had that have two different perspectives. So the first one is viewing compensation through the joint action lens, okay? So if you view compensation through the joint action lens, okay, what I'm talking about with joint actions is the square one system, okay? The square one system was developed by Sean Sherman. Sean Sherman worked for the Cubs back in 2007, 2008. And ever since then, he's been using his skills as a muscle tester to create a joint map of the body, right? It turns out that all humans have the same joint map in their brain, okay? So that means that the way I was built, factory built, is the same way that you were built if you are a human, okay? So the same way I move is the same way that you move. The way that humans were meant to move is in a contralateral fashion, right? When my right foot hits the ground, my right leg is pronating and my left arm is pronating, right? Because I walk in this cross crawl fashion, okay? And if my right foot is hitting the ground and pronating, that means that my left leg is supinating and my right arm is supinating, okay? So if one of those joint actions cannot absorb that force, or the body cannot sense that that joint action is available to do its responsibility, then the force has to move a different way through the body, okay? So just for a quick example, if my hip cannot sense adduction, right, that force is going to have to be moved around in a different way, right? So no matter what your view is, whether you view compensation through the joint action lens or the muscle firing pattern lens, we all agree that compensation is just a thing that happens, right? Why does it happen? Don't know, couldn't tell you. I guess the body just wants to stay alive. So that's the reason why we compensate. But now we have to break down what is compensation and how do we fix it. So we already talked about the square one system. We talked about how our right leg hits the ground and all these different joint actions happen when that right leg hits the ground, and then when the left leg hits the ground, the opposite set of joint actions happen on the other side of the body, right? So what about muscle firing patterns? Okay, so this I'm referring to reflexive performance reset. Okay? This is very commonly known. Oh, that's an N. Excuse me. Oh my gosh, I can't spell. Okay, can't spell that well. All right, muscle firing patterns. Reflex performance reset. Okay, so now this talks about, let's take hip extension, for example. So in hip extension, the glute fires first, then the hamstring, then the contralateral QL, okay? And if you are compensating during the activity of hip extension, your hamstring might fire first, and then your contralateral QL, and then your glute, okay? And when that happens, you might have hamstring strains or hamstring tightness. Now that's no fun, but let's say your QL fires first, and then your hamstring, and then your glute. Well, then you might have lower back pain or some issues in your lower back, right? What about hip flexion? Well, if my hip is flexing and my psoas isn't available to initiate hip flexion, now lots of other muscles contribute to hip flexion, but the psoas needs to be the initiator of hip flexion, because if it can't, then the quad is going to have to take over. If the quad can't do it, then the tib has to do it. If the tib can't do it, then the arm has to do it. And if the arm can't do it, then the jaw has to do it, okay? Might have messed up the order there. We're kind of just rolling through this. But anyway, you can view movement through a lot of different lenses. That's what I'm trying to say here, okay? And I've learned both of these systems, and I think they both have a place, and they're both effective in their own ways, right? So if you're having trouble with a certain movement pattern, right, you could choose either, or I like to sometimes even choose a combination of both of these systems, right? They are both very effective at reducing incidence of pain and injury. They're both effective at decreasing tightness, inhibition, and all these other things. I think that some of these systems work better than the others. We might get into that a little bit later. But again, this goes back to the fact of what is the root cause of pain and injury? If the root cause of pain and injury is compensation, then do pain and injuries really just happen? Like, do you just get hurt just because? Especially with non-contact injuries, or even concussions, or even breaking a bone, right? So when we talk about bones, tendons, and ligaments, I just want to go off on a sidebar really quick and step away from the nervous system. Because when we're talking about these two systems right here, and when we're talking about compensation, I'm specifically talking about neural compensation. I'm not necessarily talking about any other form of compensation that you might be familiar with other systems. A sidebar to this is that if you break a bone, or if you tear a tendon, or you develop tendinopathy, oftentimes, yes, that could be due to muscle firing patterns, or it could be due to joint actions, right? And especially the compensations that happen after a pain and injury, right? Those things can definitely be the cause of the nervous system, just trying to keep the body alive and keep it moving. But really quick, if your tendon develops tendinopathy, or you have a degenerative tendon, bone, ligament, whatever it is, your body and your mitochondria, okay, might not be able to produce the metabolic water, okay? It needs to rehydrate those things, especially tendons and ligaments, right? Because the water in the body is different from the water in the glass, okay? It's on page number 1 right here, okay? So again, the water in the glass, different from the water in the body. If your mitochondria can't make metabolic water, you might have issues with your tendons and your ligaments. Now that's a conversation that is a very deep one, and it is for another day. Now, if your bones break easily, they're brittle, or they're degenerative, they fracture in some way, right? Well, Robert O. Becker has the answer for you, okay? Again, we're not gonna get into the body electric today, and we're not gonna get into the work of Gerald Pollack, and we're not gonna get into the work of Doug Wallace, but you should probably check them out if you're somebody that wants to be in the health and performance industry, because they have some really important things to say. Now, excluding pain and injury that is going to be caused by physiological conditions or environmental things, right? Excluding that altogether, We are just referring to compensation in terms of neural compensation, okay? So now let's talk a little bit more about the square one system because we touched on it a little bit, okay? The square one system views compensation through the lens of joint actions. Now, if all of your joint actions have enough motor control, okay, and all motor control is can your brain send and receive signals properly? If it can't, then the force has to move through your body a different way, right? So if your knee hurts when you squat, and that isn't necessarily due to a structural issue, even if it is tendinopathy, right? Lots of people have tendinopathy. Not everybody has pain, right? The pain damage continuum is something that is very, very interesting to me, right? Because if you image 1 million people's tendons, maybe only 50,000 of them actually have tendinopathy, but 200,000 of them might have degenerative tendons. Maybe it's probably more, right? But not everybody has pain, okay? Now, when you squat, let's say, and your knee hurts, could be your knee, your hip, your back, your upper back, it doesn't really matter, okay? Because in the square one system, I'm not using an individual tool to solve a complex human movement problem. I'm using an ultimate multi-tool in order to serve me in many different instances, right? Because if you have knee pain, ankle pain, foot pain, hip pain, back pain, doesn't really matter because we are all meant to move in a certain way. And if you deviate too far from that, if you compensate too much around certain pain, right, then you might get an injury. Or if you have an injury and you keep pushing through it, you might develop pain in maybe another area of your body just because you're trying to compensate around that original injury. So again, my question to you is, do pain and injuries just happen? I don't think so. I think they're due to compensation, especially if it has anything to do with the nervous system, okay? So now, let's talk a little bit about reflex performance reset. So let's say you keep straining your hamstring over and over and over again, and you just can't figure out a way to fix it. And so what do? Oh, you stretch it, you try to strengthen it, you try to do everything that the industry tells you to do, and it's not working. Well, maybe your body is trying to compensate around the activity of hip extension. Let's say you're sprinting and you're flexing and extending your hip as you go down the track, right? And the body has to move that force in a different way, and the hamstring fires first, then the QL, then the glute. Well, then all that force is going through the hamstring when the glute was the one that was meant to do the hip extension activity primarily, and it was supposed to initiate that hip extension, right? It doesn't mean that the hamstring isn't involved in hip extension. We all know that to be true. But if the glute fires first, then the hamstring can do its job, and then the contralateral QL can do its job, right? Let's say you're squatting and your QL fires first, then your hamstring, then your glute. Well, if the QL is initiating hip extension, then the glute isn't doing its job. The hamstring's not doing its job, right? So if you view compensation through the lens of muscle firing patterns, then you will use the techniques in reflex performance reset, which are, using neurolymphatic reset points and stimulating them using acupressure or pushing on them with your finger or your client doing it themselves, right? And then mixing that with belly breathing, and then that will hopefully, doesn't happen all the time, but hopefully it'll reset you into your reflexive state where everything's doing its job. Whereas in square one, if we view compensation through the joint action lens, then we are using isometrics in gait-specific positions in order to convince the body that it's safe to move in the way that it's supposed to. Now, I've had success with both systems, but I was hired here at IHT Human Performance because of the square one system. Now, in my next video, I'm going to sort of talk about square one, talk about how I learned it, and talk about how you can use it and all the different things that you can use it with. But it is important, right, to get out of the way how we view compensation and what is the root cause of pain and injury. Because if we can't answer these questions and we don't have solutions to these questions, then as a strength coach, or as an AT, or as a PT, or as a chiro, or as a massage therapist, or as an acupuncturist, you're gonna be banging your head in the wall trying to get people results because you can't figure out why they have pain. You can't figure out why they're having injuries, right? And if you just default to well, it's not my job to fix those things, then fine. Then that's okay. I'll take them. I'll try my best because I was an athlete that had pain and injury, and I didn't get results using the normal stuff that everybody said was supposed to work. So I had to find ways to help myself, right? And in this world, if you can't find the answer asking a bunch of people, then you gotta go look for it yourself. And if you don't, if you just accept your reality, then that's fine too. But don't come complaining when you can't figure out why pain and injuries just happen, right? They don't just happen. Your body doesn't work that way, right? Why does your shoulder hurt when you bench press, but the dude 3 benches down from you is bench pressing fine with absolutely no pain at all? Because you're trying to compensate around that task, and unless you figure out how to fix it, you're gonna keep having pain there, or you're gonna try and use these little one tool for one job type things, right? Like, oh, use this program for shoulder pain, use this program for hip pain, use this program for foot and ankle issues, use this program for knee pain. Guess what? That works a very small percentage of the time. You would rather have one big system that fixes pain and injuries, and you only need to learn one thing. You only need to learn one thing. So one big tool for a whole ton of jobs. That's what the toolbox should be, right? So that's why I have both of these things in my toolbox. This is why I interned at the University of Minnesota. This is why I went to Sean Sherman and I took my Square One course last year in April. Because I want to find the root cause of pain and injury so that my athletes can be better than your athletes, so that my athletes can have less pain and injury and less compensation so that they can go out and dominate on the weekends and during the week in their sport. That's why here at IHT, we want to be the best, because we are going to go through all the ideas in the industry and we are going to find what works the best. So my name is Zach Jungels here at IHT Performance in Charleston, South Carolina. Thank you very much. Looking forward to seeing you in the next video.